My friends, what if I told you that the origins of speedrunning are a culturally Midwestern American thing? Speedrunning has certainly evolved, shifted, and changed from what it looked like throughout much of the earlier days in the 2000s and early 2010s to something quite different today. The reasons for this are complex without really a single satisfying answer, but what I do know well is what speedrunning evolved from. You see, in those early days, speedrunning was an activity predominantly done in the Midwest of the United States. For one reason or another, most of the speedrunners I knew back then, and who had left their mark on the various games, came from places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, suburbs of Chicago, real life middle American Midwestern suburbia. And when it came to speedrunners outside of the United States, places that had some similarities in terms of weather, social culture, and global influence. So places like the major Canadian cities or Scandinavia and Northern Europe. Notably, speedrunning history never seemed to emerge from major global metropolitan cities like London, Paris, New York, Los Angeles, or Hong Kong. And I do have my theories on that. So today I wanted to explore a handful of historic events and incidents foundational to early speedrunning which were based out of the American Midwest, as well as speculate on exactly why I think speedrunning distinctly comes from Midwestern culture. So just like saying "ope" when bumping into someone at the grocery store, or playing a game of euchre, or getting custard from Culver's, here is my grand theory of the Midwestern origins of speedrunning.
Here we go!
In 2002, a handful of gamers involved with the elite community for speedrunning, GoldenEye and Perfect Dark met somewhere in a suburb of Chicago in what was dubbed the 2002 Illinois Meet. Now, while such a thing is not uncommon today, you have to understand that the idea of an internet meetup back then was truly unheard of. This is the kind of thing that your mother thought you would get kidnapped and disappear forever. People just didn't meet online friends back then. And what's not only amazing about this meet in particular is, of course, that none of that happened. It was a great meet. But we actually have surviving footage of what was recorded from the meet, and it is truly remarkable. Now, a lot of the footage's audio has bit rotted in some glitchy ways in the years since. I've tried to repair it with many codecs, but a lot of it is still decent. And you'll see and hear some clips in this section. Much of this meet takes place in a typical middle American house of the era in suburban Chicago, and it just oozes that Midwest vibe and culture of the time. I mean, look at this wood paneling in the basement, the computer room type setting. A very residential suburban backyard, typical of middle America at the time. The kind of place where many of us grew up, playing with siblings, cousins, friends over the years. Now, I'm going to be intentionally somewhat vague with names and locations throughout this whole video, because a lot of this stuff happened over 20 years ago, and none of these people knew that they would be talked about decades later to tens of thousands of people. But this meet featured a handful of people who have reached mythical status in the GoldenEye, Perfect Dark speedrun community and the internet as a whole. Randy Buikima had just become Perfect Dark champion thanks to a hoard of over 40 personal records, which he posted on July 18th, 2002. He was very much the cool kid at the event, performing stunts such as a double axle twist in the backyard, or the ability to spin a N64 console on his finger. I mean, honestly, that's just sick. I have no idea how he could do it.
Just keep spinning it, eventually it'll get pressure.
Another attendee was a fellow by the name of Zebo, who would go on to be much better known for work in other fields, particularly the poker world. Yet another attendee was one of the first Perfect Dark champions, Paragon, and so naturally with so many players there, many multiplayer matches took place between all participants. In fact, another attendee was able to gain access to the local church, as his mother was actively involved there, and so the boys were able to set up a massive projector to play some multiplayer matches in which we hear their reaction and commentary to the screen.
Are you recording this?
Yeah. It's definitely upside down though.
Yeah, this is Paragon, your narrator. We're projecting the screen outside the window now onto the house of the priest who lives next door.
Out of the innocent streets of Chicago.
We're going to try to get a, 259 rescue PA and 14 Chicago agent. I already got 2 records earlier on.
This is Derek, by the way. To give you an idea how big that screen is, it's probably 12 feet high, like 15 feet wide, so it's rather huge.
It's used in the church to like read hymns when people are singing, but we're just going to use it for Perfect
We're
Dark.
playing Perfect Dark.
Play some Challenge 30 action. Shut it out.
This is officially the biggest screen in the history of multiplayer.
Oh man. Oh yeah, we got the Paragon game pack in.
Paragon.
I wonder how far away the meter's from. I'm gonna go check. You guys can start again.
It's Derek standing by the screen to give you an idea just how big it is. Derek, stand back by. Hey, walk back up to it, Dirk. Walk back up. There's a full shot of it. His head's barely entering onto the screen. Put your arm up. Put your arm up.
Dirk is about 6 foot tall.
Yeah. So you get quite a lot more.
He's definitely messing with sacred things right now. Alright.
Now, 2 things about this. One is that there's a good chance that outside of any official E3 or Space World type convention, that back in 2002, this was like one of the largest projection screen setups that gamers had ever used to play on. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but like maybe not. How common was this kind of gaming setup back then? It was certainly a pioneering feat, at least a very rare feat when it came to 5th generation gameplay, and just not something that was very doable with common consumer grade electronics at the time. This is just one of the many bits that make this meet so legendary. Another thing is that, to tie in this thesis that I'll present later of the Midwestern origins of speedrunning, I connected with these sorts of liminal spaces and mytho-American aesthetic. And so this legendary moment taking place in a church reminds me of this iconic liminal spaces photo. This Jesus painting in a church basement that just somehow feels like a place we've all passed through at some point in our lives. And the general vibe of these clips from this meet is just so distinctly Midwestern. It's not California surfer bro style, it's not New Jersey Tuscan McMansion style, it's not some kind of elite preppy New England aesthetic, it's not anything from the deep south. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, American viewers, but much of America doesn't even have basements outside of the Midwest, right? This basement setup is definitively Midwestern. And sure, that might not be unexpected for a meet literally referred to these days as Illinois 2002, but wait, there's more, as in a few more iconic meets or characters of the early 2000s in speedrunning sharing these Midwestern characteristics. The boss meet and boss tour is another legendary piece of Elite lore. Brian the Big Boss Man joined the community in late 2001 and would go on to become champion of GoldenEye. By 2005, he had also climbed the rankings in Perfect Dark and was very close to becoming the dual champion, which means taking first place in both games, something no one had ever done before at the same time, though the aforementioned Randy Bukima had been champion of both games at separate times. But Boss was close to being the first person to hold both titles simultaneously. Now, Perfect Dark has one level, Deep Sea, which is advantage on the PAL or European console due to the far sight weapon there not having a limit in terms of how far it can shoot. These PAL consoles were very hard to come by in North America, but eventually a leader of the community at the time, Endgamer, who had a PAL console and all of the technical stuff that was needed to play and capture footage from it, was able to arrange a meetup with Boss, so that Boss could play Deep Sea on PAL and potentially become the dual champion. Now, that's all cool and dandy, But what ties this into the Midwestern origins of speedrunning is that all of this took place somewhere in the vast reaches of suburban Wisconsin and Minnesota, core Midwest states. It involved a road trip of endgamer traveling from one state to the other to visit Boss, and I mean, look at this. Taking place in August 2005, Endgamer figured he would make a very cool piece of content in filming the Boss Tour to give the community a bit of insight in terms of who Boss was, the man behind all these remarkable world records in GoldenEye and Perfect Dark in the previous few years.
But
you
he
can
says
still
that's
call
why.
me boss, that's okay.
Boss, or the big boss man or whatever.
We see Boss introduce himself on the lawn of a place that looks like it comes from those 2007 nostalgia summer's day morning dove videos. It's just truly Kino, it's aesthetic, it's a vibe, and if you're old enough like me, it takes you back to those summer days on a lawn like this. And then we get into Boss's basement. Again, we get this wonderful wood paneling and just a comfy Midwest basement. The kind of place that you might have grown up in or spent time playing with cousins at your grandparents' house and all of that good stuff. I love this part too. Boss leafs through his collection of Nintendo Power issues, neatly organized in a bookshelf downstairs. It reminds me so much of leafing through random magazines and books in my own basement and my grandmother's basement over the ages. It feels like this kind of basement is the only place that such a speedrunning career as that of Big Boss Man could have taken place. The hours of grinding, the deep diving into games that, in any conventional sense, were indeed getting older and past their lifespan, as people call it. I just can't picture someone from a super wealthy upbringing in a mansion doing this, as they'd have more cooler toys to play with and frankly better things to do. The newest video game consoles, laser tag, a swimming pool, taking private tutor lessons and playing sports and all that kind of stuff. And equally, I can't really picture someone living in poverty in a cramped apartment or rundown trailer doing this either, as that lifestyle just doesn't afford enough comfort to spend countless hours speedrunning, which, in all honesty, as much as I've loved it over the years, is a frankly trivial and frivolous task at its core. Speedrunning was something that could only have come out of these sorts of basements, from a comfortable enough home with just enough technology and toys, and just enough of an early internet connection to participate with the communities. Nowadays, people from these other walks of life do speedrun, because speedrunning has evolved from its origin stages. But back then, this was just rarely the case. Boss would get those deep sea times, by the way. Not world records, but enough points in the rankings to become champion of Perfect Dark, the first ever dual champion, and a title he would hold for about 2 years until Perfect Ace came along and passed Boss in December 2007 in Perfect Dark, and the rest is history from there. But even so, this boss meet is a truly iconic piece of not only speedrunning lore, but another direct connection between the early days of speedrunning and its distinctly Midwestern origins.
It has Mike Arthawk, is that the one I played on?
Yes.
To get the infamous deep sea PAL times.
And it's running off my computer right now.
And here are the games John supplied us for the Nintendo Championship. And here's where we're copying stuff from the upstairs computer onto his. And then here are the games that I have that we use for the championship. Alright. Here's the GoldenEye strategy guide. And Perfect Dark right here. And Mario Kart 64.
Now, one more truly emblematic case of Midwest speedrunning is the enigmatic case of Darklight93. I call him that by an old gamer tag or username because he's asked me in the years since to avoid using his real name online, which is understandable, how modern day work and searches and so on take place. Again, 20 years ago, it felt that various troll posting and just having a laugh on the internet would never bleed over into real life. It reminds me of that quote you see in these similar nostalgia posts about how we used to go onto the internet to escape real life, but now we enjoy real life to escape the internet. Anyways, if you're still unsure, this guy's name was something that rhymed with Howin James, so Darklight93. You might know or remember a bit of the story. I'll just read a little bit of his old wiki page to remind you and prompt what you've perhaps pondered. I did cover this in my first ever Fireside video back in 2015 actually, but here's the intro to his speedrun wiki page from back then. Darklight93 is a multi-generation professional gamer who has been actively gaming since August 1997 and performed professional speedrunning from August 97 to August 2012. Throughout his career, he has completed 20 projects, obtained 50 video game speedrunning championships, 13 global, 1 continental, 8 regional, 3 national, 17 state, and 8 divisional. He has also obtained over 7,000 world records for various games. He has played 300 video games. He is currently recognized as one of the greatest speedrunners of all time for his absolute 100% devotion to pro gaming, along with his insane ability to completely control the scoreboards of almost any first-person shooter. He has been famous in the gaming community for having a unique gothic evil style instead of the standard behavior of a pro gamer, in addition to being respectful towards every single gamer regardless of their playing skill. Another thing that Darklight93 has been well known for is being a crossroad platformer, which means he has played on all 3 main video game console makers, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo up until 2012, when he retired from Nintendo on January 1, 2012. Man, that's such a throwback. It's an amazing article. I'll get into a couple more details later, but another one of my favorite bits was this section, Respect for Revolutionizing Speedrunning. In late 2007, DL set up a page that asked all of his viewers and followers to click a button to vote on his total amount of respect earned for all the years he has put into the gaming community. Below is a chart with the numbers, and the numbers are in the millions every year. It's just such an amazing thing to imagine this world that Darklight was creating. Imagine being this kind of pro gamer with some kind of website that you would click and get these respect points. It's just so amazing. It's making me smile and my heart smile as I'm reading this. Many years later, after I made some videos about it, Darklight would reveal that all of these claims were fake. And oftentimes the story would just end there. But it's the scope of these claims that were just so remarkable. While most players would write a small bio or a wiki page, a few paragraphs in a typical early fandom casual writing style, Darklight took his page to a whole new level. I copied and pasted his wiki and it totaled 57 pages or over 17,000 words, which is the size of a small novella. It's so insane, the scope of this thing. Darklight credits himself and numerous contributors who worked on the page, which they seem to work on from about 2007 when these pages were launched, on and off until about 2013. So it's just who would do this? To so actively work on a page of nonsense like this for 6 years? Well, a group of Midwestern friends from Iowa is who. After all, one of Darklight's most commonly referenced traits was that he was from Iowa, perhaps the pinnacle of Midwestern Middle America and the boredom and ennui that often goes along with it. And I'm not trashing Iowa. I would love it. I love the fast food and the gaming and all that kind of stuff. But it's the epitome of that just kind of, I hate my hometown, Midwest emo kind of thing. Darklight eventually posted a 47-minute confessional in 2022 in which he revealed that it was all indeed fake and just his bored musings. He said that the list of the contributors was mostly fake, with only one friend who collaborated with him. He even recounts how his old photos were cringe, and that's the beauty of it. They were cringe in that distinctly Midwest emo kind of way. You can totally just picture this guy and his friends going to the mall, going to Culver's, getting custard, hanging out all day, going to Hot Topic. I remember this one image of Darklight, and I'm sure it's gone. It was like, on his Facebook years ago when I had him, 20 years ago. This image on screen now is the closest thing I've seen resembling it when I browse the Older Brother Core subreddit, which is a sort of similar vibe and aesthetic. But it was just such an insane image of like someone walked into Hot Topic with a gift card, had no idea of this style, was trying to look goth, emo, thug, everything at once. Just this chaotic Midwestern blunder years. And then you can just picture guys like this after getting their fill of Culvers and hanging out at the mall and stuff, and then just going home to hang out, game, eat Doritos, and just edit these insane stories into a random wiki on the internet, And it's just not the thing I picture even being possible to happen in Los Angeles or New York City or Hong Kong or London. You know what I mean? Like, those cities do have their strange and unusual characters, but they're much more distinct in that kind of urban way. And this iconic picture of Darklight 93 standing in the empty barren field, it just epitomizes that stereotypical Midwestern boredom that could only result in this kind of activity taking place.
The first half, maybe 2008 to 2010, I was actually trying to pull a fast one over and fit in with the community. And then the second half, I just had fun with it. I kept adding to the page. I turned it into this superficial Fantasyland essay. And I just had fun with it until I moved on and started working, and then eventually went back to college, which, by the way, I have 2 legitimate achievements that I worked for and earned that were not faked. This is my bachelor's from 2020 from Iowa State. Major in Information Systems, cum laude. There's the seal. That was very rewarding getting that after growing up with so many problems and not really having anything to my name. So when I went back to school and I got that, that was very self-fulfilling. And here is the bad boy that I just got a couple of months ago in May. This is my master's in Information Systems.
So I made a whole YouTube post about this concept last year, a written post, and this is what I wrote back then. I've never seen anyone discuss this before, but the unspoken origins of speedrunning have always been deeply tied to the middle class of the American Midwest, Canada, most of whose population is near the American Midwest, and to some extent, the Nordic European countries. Speedrunning was never intended to be a glorious act. It was a way for bored, middle-class Midwesterners to sink time through crisp autumns that got way too cold quickly, and dreary winters that felt like they would never end. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has seen images like these, curated by Twitter and X social media accounts like those of Mytho America and the summer of 2007. While they are intended to evoke some feeling of nostalgia and daily life in the North American continent, they speak to me on a level of reminding me of the origins of organized speedrunning. Virtually every person I encountered through speedrunning in the late 90s and 2000s lived in a neighborhood like those seen in these images. I remember it hitting me sometime around the dawn of Twitch in 2011-12, now completely thrusting into the era of social media. At the time, there were no speedrunners from New York or Los Angeles, cities we now colloquially view as inhabited by coastal elites. There were speedrunners from Minneapolis, Chicago, Toronto, Winnipeg, wintry Midwestern cities, as well as in Stockholm or Helsinki, spiritually similar cities from across the ocean, but never Rome or Athens or Istanbul. And of course, there were legendary speedrunners from middle-sized towns through Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, and the likes, but speedrunning was just never seen as something cool or trendy done by citizens of New York, New Orleans, Miami, Los Angeles. I vividly remember thinking somewhere around 2007, like, why are there no GoldenEye speedrunners from these places? And I realize now it's because speedrunning was something mostly done by middle-class Midwesterners who were well off enough to own video game consoles and spend hundreds of hours gaming, but not those quite well off enough to have connections to launch into white-collar careers in higher education. This is generally speaking, of course. Perhaps speedrunning was not the most degenerate act man has ever come up with, but it was not something really done by those educated at Harvard or Stanford, for example. Twitch, live streaming, YouTube content, and all that stuff certainly changed things. Speedrunning left its niches of Midwestern towns and the general Great Lakes megalopolis. It expanded on both sides of the class spectrum with technology more accessible to those less well off, and with super rich, high production value millionaire streamers dabbling in the activity themselves, if not earning large money from content made from the act. And yeah, I should add that most of inhabited Canada, as well as Northern Europe, are spiritually similar to the Midwestern United States, as they have long, cold winters where you just want to stay inside and game, and have similar levels of human development and quality of life in terms of having just enough to enjoy the comfort of spending time speedrunning. I received a handful of comments on that post, which I thought were interesting and want to address because they add to the conversation here. Psychedelic Joey, who's a longtime Diddy Kong Racing speedrunner, says this: "Not to have confirmation bias, but like every major Diddy Kong Racing player is from the Midwest or Northern Europe. I myself set like 80 world records, and I'm from a similar life situation and climate. I'm from Cleveland. This is blowing my mind the deeper I think about it." Some Big Boy says, "Compared to the large coastal cities, there just isn't much to do. As someone who's lived in the middle of nowhere town for a year in Minnesota, there wasn't much to do besides game and go on the information superhighway. So it makes sense people with lots of free time on their hands in the early 2000s found different ways to keep their games they spent hundreds of hours in still fun in different ways with speedrunning." And Brianna Thompson says, "Emos and speedrunners have more in common than you'd think." And that's one that gets to me too, because while personally I was never too into emo music, many speedrunners were. I vividly remember many world record videos in the mid-2000s being set to The Used or Death Cab for Cutie, and even other rock bands that your older brother might listen to, like Linkin Park or Breaking Benjamin. And like this image, the American Football House, this is an iconic cover for emo band American Football, whose albums were all titled American Football. I'd actually never heard of them until just a few years ago, despite their debut album coming out in 1999. That's how much Midwest emo is a blind spot to me. But when I see a house like this, and a lit window like that, I can't help but think another thought. That's where speedrunning happened. In a room just like that, in the cold of the fall or winter, with a comfortable middle American life, just grinding away for hours on an old favorite game. And so often when I see those kinds of houses posted by these Mytho America and similar aesthetic accounts, that's my thought. That's exactly where a guy like me spent countless hours speedrunning and interacting with an online community. Literally the "this is where I post from" meme. And look, I know this doesn't explain everything, this grand arching theory. Like, I know there were certainly some early speedrunners from other places too, like Australia, but the Australian cities are sort of similar inverse to Canadian cities, in terms of isolation from one another at least, and the weather is inverted, with many Australians staying in the heat of the summer to avoid a scorching 40 Celsius 100 Fahrenheit day. I remember Carl Jops doing this and playing mostly during that summer in Australia, December and January. So it is kind of similar in a way, and the Aussies have always kind of been an exception to the rule on the internet. But there's this one other comment that I found especially profound. Bree Pint writes, "It might have something to do more with population density than means. Competitive Smash has coastal origins, so why weren't those kids too busy becoming investment bankers at Ivy League schools? Because there's plenty of bored middle-class kids on the coasts too, but the density allows to favor social versions of their hobby over solo versions." And that may be true too. That may explain why speedrunning was more distinctly Midwestern than Smash or other games of gaming that required more communal spaces, and that at its core might be what the gamers from Los Angeles or New York were doing all along instead of speedrunning. But there's no doubt in my mind, and I hope I've laid out with some examples, how Midwestern, Middle American culture was what birthed the speedrun scene. I suppose the only thing to ponder from there are those who, made it out of their suburbs and small towns that they disliked, and those who wanted to but didn't. These days, I love it, looking back, reflecting on the old days and olden ways. I know I'm not alone, with tons of nostalgia-based accounts and subreddits and whatnot celebrating those days. They truly were something special. Sometimes I wonder about trying to bring them back as best I can, making my own old-school forum from scratch, building a community, communicating in a slower way than modern hyper-stimulus and instant messaging. But oftentimes I wonder if it's best left in the past, simply made for musings like this on long, cold winter nights. Alas, my friends, I would love to hear your thoughts about the Midwestern origins of speedrunning. Thanks to the Patreon supporters and channel members for supporting my work. Stay true, my friends, and I will see you in the next stream, video, or fireside.